Welcome to Ghoul Talk.
Hey everyone, my name is Chris A. and welcome to Ghoul Talk. Ghoul Talk is a quick, hopefully digestible way to demystify some politically loaded talking points, vocabulary, symbols, things like that. I'm not an expert. This is just meant as a conversation between me and you, the viewer. Today we're going to talk about something that I really don't want to talk about, trans athletes. And the reason I don't want to talk about this is because I believe this is not an important issue. So the reason this is on everyone's mind, or the alleged reason this is on everyone's mind, is because Joe Biden recently signed an executive order basically guaranteeing legal protections to transgender individuals in educational settings, including in athletics. The backlash is basically that trans girls should not be allowed to compete in athletics with cisgender girls. The reason I'm saying specifically girls is because you will rarely hear anything about trans boys and men. The focus on this really is surrounding trans girls and women. We can talk about the specifics, which are trans people in general are a pretty small minority of the population. And then you've got a minority of those people who are athletes. So we're really talking about a very, very, very small group of people. So the idea that somehow this very small group of people is disrupting the integrity of women's sports, I think that's overblown. It's also important to understand that a lot of trans people, especially younger students, will either be taking hormones or puberty blockers if they're young enough, meaning their biology will change over time because of the hormone therapy they're receiving, meaning they will lose much of the physical advantage that they would have had as someone assigned male at birth. So the idea that trans women are automatically better than cisgender women at sports, that's just absurd. You know, there are certainly some cases where trans athletes are very good athletes, even with years of taking estrogen. But I think that also brings up the point that people are just different. Everyone's body is different. Even if you have only cisgender people competing with each other, some are going to be born with more muscle mass. Some produce more testosterone or more estrogen. People's bodies are naturally different. So the idea that because this person's body is different in a very specific way, they shouldn't be allowed to compete, I don't buy it. Some cisgender women are bigger and beefier and faster and stronger than other cisgender women. And those people will have a natural advantage. It's also worth discussing, some women who are not transgender have been disqualified from sports because their body naturally produces too much testosterone. Of course, the most famous example is Caster Semenya. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. She is intersex, meaning she's born with both male and female sexual characteristics, but socially has been a woman her whole life. And she was disqualified from running in her league because her body naturally produced too much testosterone. I don't know what to do with that. The only possible reason I can see an objection is the idea of scholarships, which I think maybe we should address that. So if the idea is that somehow a transgender person will be more likely to get a scholarship due to their athletic ability, that begs the question, why do we give athletic scholarships? The reason is it helps a university's bottom line, because if they give you a discount on tuition because they know if you are a good enough athlete, you will bring revenue in for the university. I'm not saying that people who work hard and people who are gifted in athletics shouldn't be rewarded, but at the same time, they're essentially, these athletes are being used by the universities for money. And I think that's something worth discussing. When I started this, I said this is a topic I don't want to talk about. And the reason I don't want to talk about it is because to me it seems like a non-issue. I think there are certain levels, right? I think the Olympics ought to be able to make their own rules. They're pretty much a self-contained organization, and the US Congress really has no say in what the Olympics can do. I think private universities, private leagues, with the system we've got, of course I believe transgender people should be allowed to compete, but I think if private universities, private leagues want to make that determination to not allow transgender athletes, I think under the system we have, that's probably their right to do it. And if a transgender person is discriminated against, that person then has the legal recourse. They can go to court and try to hold that organization accountable. I think for public schools, to me, it's a no-brainer. Accommodate people. Allow transgender people to compete. At the end of the day, it's just sports. People are starving. People are dying. And we've got members of Congress saying, can 10% of 10% of the population compete with people in their school? And I think it's just such a ridiculous question. I believe this is manufactured outrage, just like, the bathroom situation we saw years ago, where there was all of a sudden this question on whether or not transgender people are allowed to use the bathroom in public. And that's really what it came down to, because if you're saying a trans woman can't use the women's room, I have never met a trans woman who would be comfortable going into a men's room. And I don't blame them. So any trans person that I've talked to has basically said, if I can't go into the restroom where I belong, I'm not going to go into the restroom where I don't belong. So I'm just not going to use the restroom in public. Similarly, we're seeing this situation where, you can make accommodations, whatever, just let them play. Because the idea that somehow allowing a transgender person to compete, because usually it's really just one transgender person in a league or at a school. It's not like you've got gangs of transgender people who come to the school specifically to displace, the girls' track team, which oftentimes is how it's framed. And I think it's important to understand who is upset about this. When the education secretary was being interviewed for confirmation by the Senate, Rand Paul went on and on about how boys, which I think he was referring to transgender girls as boys, which is wrong, but he kept saying, do you think boys should be allowed to run track with girls? This is a United States senator who is saying, this very, very rare thing where there is a transgender student who is also an athlete. Should they be allowed to participate in their sport? Why is a 60-year-old, 70-year-old man in Congress so concerned with the genitals and the chromosomes of high school girl track students? That, to me, proves that it's total. This is not about anything but discrimination. It's very, very unusual that legislators who are cisgender men, who are decades older than anyone in high school, it's absurd to me that they are pretending to care so much. And I think it's really gross. Of course, the flip side we've seen, I believe it was in South Carolina, there was a transgender boy, so someone who was assigned female at birth, but is a boy, and took testosterone, things like that. that boy was not allowed to compete with other boys. So what they did was they forced this one boy, because he was transgender, to wrestle cisgender girls. And, surprise, surprise, he ended up beating all of them. So the whole argument that we need to segregate by genders totally breaks down when you recognize that people on hormones physiologically are more similar to cisgender people within their gender. So making a trans boy wrestle with cisgender girls because you think those two are equivalent is actually way more unfair than having a trans boy wrestle with cis boys. So the solution accomplishes exactly what people are pretending the problem is, which again, it is painted as there are all these boys dressing up as girls so that they can be the best at track. And that's just not the reality. Again, it's very rare. We should just accommodate people. If you go to a public school, whether you're trans or you're cisgender, you should be able to compete in the sport of your choice as long as the school offers that. Back to the Rand Paul thing. When he was talking, he kept saying, "Are you okay with boys running with girls?" I know what he was getting at, but I think he accidentally... if he was asking me that, I would just say no. I don't have a problem with co-ed athletics. Lots of amateur and intramural leagues are co-ed. A lot of sports, there's not a ton of difference. Something like maybe volleyball, for example. There's really not a ton of difference between the male body and the female body in terms of playing volleyball. You could easily have co-ed teams. So I think, to me, the solution is let's totally get rid of gender discrimination in sports and do things like weight classes. That, to me, makes way more sense, because if you've got a 6'5" man against a 4'3" man or boy, that's a much bigger disparity than a 6'5" man and a 6'5" woman. Let's just get rid of gender in sports in general. I think to me, that makes the most sense as the solution. And I think that's inevitable because, once we get past this fake controversy, because again, it is mostly, 70-year-old cisgender men saying, what if that girl on the track team has a penis? I don't think that's a real concern. Once we get past this, we're going to have to deal with non-binary athletes and where do they fit. So I think the answer is let's just go by weight class and skill level and just get rid of gendered sports altogether. Thank you for watching. I hope this was informative, enlightening. If you like it, make sure you like and comment. If you want to see more, subscribe, ring the bell. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Patreon. Post this on Reddit, Discord, and wherever. You know how the internet works sometimes. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.